passion that built our nation now tears it apart. A minor skirmish that starts by accident explodes into the deadliest battle ever fought on U.S. soil. Two American armies face off in a small Pennsylvania farm town. Soon 50,000 will be dead, wounded, or missing. This is the story of 8 men who fight here, and 3 days that change America forever. 2 years after the start of the Civil War, the Confederate Army is invading the North. 1 mile west of Gettysburg, rebel reconnaissance troops encounter Union resistance. The fight escalates out of control. Gettysburg, day 1, 10 a.m. "24-year-old Lieutenant Colonel Rufus Dawes leads the 6th Wisconsin Regiment of the Iron Brigade. These are the crack troops of the Army of the Potomac, 420 volunteers from the western frontier. They faced down the Confederates in Antietam. They're rugged and battle-tested. The Confederates outnumber them 2 to 1, but Dawes and his men have them on the run. The retreating rebels find cover in a 600-foot railroad cut. The rebels now have the advantage.
I first mistook the maneuver for retreat, but was undeceived by the heavy fire, which they began at once to pour upon us from their cover in the cut.
For Dawes, retreat is not an option. Heroism runs in his family. His great-grandfather, William Dawes, rode with Paul Revere.
Of all the people that you didn't want to go up against on a battlefield like that was Rufus Dawes and his Westerners. Those Western troops were tough, and he was tough. More importantly, he was tough and experienced. There's no replacement for that on the battlefield.
Just 175 yards to the railroad cut. It will cost Dawes 1 man for every yard they advance.
The whole field behind is streaming with men, plunging in agony, sinking to death on the ground.
In the noise and thick smoke, Dawes must rely on the regimental flags, the colors, to command his troops. But flags are a magnet for enemy fire.
Men were being shot by the 20s and 30s. But the boys crowded in right and left towards the colors and went forward.
Dawes loses 10 men carrying the colors in a matter of minutes. Confederate flag is within the reach of his Iron Brigade men.
Eggleston sprang forward to seize it and was shot and mortally wounded. Private Anderson, furious at the killing of his brave young comrade, with a terrific blow split the skull of the rebel who had shot young Eggleston. Into this deadly melee came Corporal Francis A. Waller, who seized and held the rebel battle flag.
Throw down your muskets!
The fight is over in less than 20 minutes. There are 600 rebel dead, wounded, or missing. Dawes loses nearly half his men.
He's one of those rare soldiers that when everything else is chaotic, Dawes was able to find clarity. He's able to find purpose. He understands that his soldiers have to be inspired by his presence.
But Dawes' win at the railroad cut is the exception. All around Gettysburg, 28,000 rebel troops are overwhelming 20,000 Union soldiers. The Confederate force, 75,000 strong, is streaming towards Gettysburg. The Army of Northern Virginia is led by legendary battlefield commander Robert E. Lee. Lee's strategy: shift the fighting out of the South and into the North, threatening cities like Harrisburg and Washington, D.C. He runs into the Army of the Potomac at Gettysburg. This is where they'll fight.
If you look at Gettysburg on a map, it looks like a wagon wheel almost, with the town in the center and all the spokes going out in all these different directions. The fact that Robert E. Lee and his troops ended up at Gettysburg was not what he wanted to happen at all. This battle started by accident, it started because of the roads, and as more troops arrived on these very roads, it escalated into the largest battle ever fought in the Western Hemisphere.
Having won a string of victories across the South, Lee's army invades the North at the peak of its strength.
One word would sum up Robert E. Lee's feeling in marching to Gettysburg, and that word is confident. They see the end of the tunnel. They can feel that if they maybe win in the North, that this war might finally end.
The moment was now in '63. Lee knew it, and he didn't want it to pass by.
What you got to remember is Lee is not there to win another battle. Robert E. Lee's there to win the war.
On the northern edge of Gettysburg, Union troops are taking a beating. All that stands between the town and the rebel assault is the 11th Corps. Among them, Sergeant Amos Humiston, ex-whaler, father of 3. He enlisted after hearing President Abraham Lincoln's plea for 300,000 recruits.
Amos Humiston was like so many Union soldiers who felt this deep love for family and for home, but he also had a deep sense of commitment for the Army and for his nation.
A bullet glanced off his ribs 6 weeks ago at Chancellorsville.
All I ask is I can die in battle like a man. But I hate the idea of dying here like a hog.
The odds are against him. Battering the 11th Corps from a hill above town is Lee's newly appointed Lieutenant General Dick Ewell. Tenacious, eccentric, profane. Ewell lost his left leg fighting the Iron Brigade last summer at the Second Battle of Bull Run. Now he's out for revenge. A month ago, Robert E. Lee's legendary second-in-command, Stonewall Jackson, was killed in battle. Ewell replaced him. It's a lot to live up to. But today, Ewell has the Union on the run. After suffering 9,000 casualties, Union soldiers retreat from Gettysburg. Humiston has orders to cover the retreat. But they're under heavy fire. By 4 p.m., his units outflanked and fall back into town. But they've got nowhere to go. Ewell's Confederate troops are spreading out through the town. It's a rout for the rebels. Amos Humiston is surrounded. He's in for the fight of his life. The Army of Northern Virginia is on a roll, mowing down Union troops with deadly precision. After just 10 hours of fighting, the Union's retreating. 9,000 already killed or wounded. The rebels are close to the victory Lee seeks.
Every battle that Lee fights, every victory that he wins, where he does not achieve the destruction of the Army of the Potomac, he just expended capital with no strategic effect. Lee knows the clock's ticking. He wants to stay on them so that he can destroy them.
Sergeant Amos Humiston puts his life on the line covering the Union retreat. Confederate troops have overrun the town. Of the 270 men in Humiston's regiment, all but 18 are killed, captured, or wounded. Humiston is trapped.
You have put the little ones to bed, dear wife, and covered them o'er with care. My Frankie, Allie, and Fred, and they have said their evening prayer. Perhaps they breathed the name of one who is far in southern land, and wished he too were there to join their little band. Oh, when will this rebellion cease? This cursed war be over? And and we our dear ones meet, to part from them no more.
Across Gettysburg, terrified residents hide wherever they can, even in the town's bank vault. Others flee as the rebels swarm through town. Especially African Americans, to avoid being seized by the rebel army. Just 7 miles north of the Mason-Dixon line, Gettysburg is on the Underground Railroad, a route of safe houses for escaped slaves fleeing to the north. Their destination, cities like New York and Philadelphia, where supporters provide food and protection. If caught, reprisals are brutal. Ears chopped off, hamstrings cut. It's no wonder slaves are the single largest financial asset in the United States.
The enslaved population of the South, by itself, is worth more than all the railroads and factories and banks of the United States together.
It's a business worth more than $3.5 billion.
The wealth of the South is almost wholly dependent on enslaved persons.
Whether you're looking at states' rights, whether you're looking at political aspects of it, everything points back to slavery. Slavery is at the center of everything that caused the Civil War.
By nightfall, the Confederate flag is flying over Gettysburg. Homes and public buildings become makeshift hospitals to deal with the flood of casualties. Fannie Bueller, a housewife and mother, risks home and family, taking in wounded Union soldiers.
I never saw a more unsightly set of men, with their dirty, torn garments, hatless, shoeless, and footsore. I pitied them from the depth of my heart.
Until now, the bloody business of nursing has always been a male profession. But during the Civil War, 20,000 women sign on to care for the casualties. One Union nurse, Clara Barton, will go on to found the Red Cross. Rebel soldiers go door to door looking for Union soldiers. They're hiding all over town. Lee has nowhere to put prisoners. During the war, so many are captured that North and South follow an honor system. Paroled prisoners take an oath not to rejoin the fight until formally exchanged.
Parole is simply, I'm going to give you a piece of paper that says, don't fight anymore, and if I catch you fighting, then bad things are going to happen to you. Then what we're going to do later is we're going to have men from our army and men from your army meet at a neutral place, and we're going to trade soldiers just like kids sitting around trading playing cards. You know, I'll trade you 3 generals for 4 colonels and 9 lieutenants for 50 privates.
The punishment for breaking parole is death. Amos Humiston is wounded and alone in a yard in the middle of town. He grasps an ambrotype, a photographic image of his 3 children fixed in glass, a present from his wife on his way to war.
The Amos Humiston story is going to resonate with any soldier. If you go to any unit in the United States military today, obviously you're going to find service members with pictures of their children, their wives, their sweethearts, because that is a tangible link to your normal life. Your condition in combat is not normal. You're there in the service of your country to do what the nation asks you to do.
The stakes are rising for both North and South. On the high ground outside town, Rufus Dawes and the Union Army dig in. It's here that the Battle of Gettysburg will be won or lost. Suffering heavy losses, Union troops pull out of Gettysburg, leaving the town in Confederate control.
It might appear that the fighting on the first day for the Union was a huge waste. They lost really bad on the first day. But the intense struggle they put up north and west of town, the intense struggle that some of them put up through the streets of Gettysburg, allowed them to fall back to their chosen position.
They retreat to a nearby series of hills that peak at 800 feet. High ground that gives the Union a critical military advantage. On Culp's Hill, Rufus Dawes and what's left of his Iron Brigade unit dig in. They have a new weapon, the shovel. They're building breastworks, a form of fortification dating back to the Romans. Some officers think defensive walls create cowards, not Dawes. After losing half his men, he wants all the protection he can get. Down below, Ewell has orders from Robert E. Lee to take Cemetery and Culp's Hills, but with the qualifier, if practicable. Ewell decides to wait for reinforcements. It's a decision with critical consequences.
If you're looking up and you're seeing this great amount of work going on up there, and your men are tired from the march they've just made and from the battle they've just fought, something in him triggered. I'm not going to do this, or I can't do this now, but certainly at the end of the day, he's going to disappoint his commander, and I'm sure he's going to disappoint himself. The Confederacy will pay for that for the next 3 days.
This is one of the great what-ifs of the battle. Had Ewell occupied and controlled Culp's Hill and the land around it, the Union Army would have simply had to leave, and the battle would have been fought somewhere else, maybe not so much to the Yankees' advantage.
In the fields around Gettysburg, a grim new harvest. The dead and wounded from day one. Tending to the injured on both sides, Dr. LeGrand Wilson, Confederate, deeply religious, hometown Jackson, Mississippi. Educated in the North, his family owns 40 slaves in Mississippi.
This was my first experience on the battlefield after the fighting. And it was horrible beyond description. If every human being could have witnessed the result of the mad passions of men I saw that night, war would cease. There would never be another battle.
The staggering level of death in the Civil War is difficult to wrap your brain around.
The commonly used numbers for how many soldiers died during the Civil War is between 620 and 630,000. Today, that would mean that we would lose 6 million American lives.
One innovation making this war so deadly, the mini-ball. 90% of the soldiers Wilson treats have mini-ball wounds. A hollow base and grooves stabilize its flight for better range and accuracy. On impact, it flattens out, causing much larger wounds than traditional musket balls. The warped bullet shatters bones that splinter and tear through the body. And the grooves in the bullet carry deadly bacteria leading to gangrene. The only way to stop it, amputation. African Americans serve as stretcher bearers. Some slaves use the invasion as a chance to escape. By the end of the war, 500,000 slaves flee to the north. 150,000 will enlist in the Union Army. Dr. Wilson loses a family member on the first day of battle.
Among the dead was my own nephew, Lieutenant George Adrian Howes, who must have been shot in the advance upon the enemy in the morning. His faithful servant, Stephen, came out on the battlefield and sought for and found his body, and carried it back to the hospital for burial.
Family members often serve side by side. It's one reason why they fight so hard.
In some states, a quarter or more of the military-aged men were dead as a result of the war, with hundreds of thousands more wounded. In some cases, all the young men of a town were wiped out during the Civil War.
The hills outside Gettysburg. In the last year, President Abraham Lincoln has fired 5 commanders of the Union Army. Commander number 6, George Meade. Proud, explosive, a West Pointer like Robert E. Lee. Just 3 days on the job. When the messenger brought the news of his promotion, he thought he was being arrested. But Meade arrives with an advantage: the high ground. As a topographical engineer, he knows how to use it. He positions his troops to take advantage of the terrain, placing them on Little Round Top, Cemetery Ridge, Cemetery Hill, and Culp's Hill. A defensive line in the shape of a fish hook. As Confederate troops flood into Gettysburg, Meade can move his men to answer attacks from any direction.
Union forces had interior lines in this defensive position. That is, their right flank was very close to the left flank, and they could move reinforcements from one flank to another, made it a perfect defensive position.
Rebel troops in town don't notice Amos Humiston. Mortally wounded, he prepares to die alone, except for the photograph of his children.
How I want to see them and their mother is more than I can tell. I hope that we may all see each other again. The first time that I see you, I will tell you more than I can think of now. Be a good girl. So, goodbye.
Amos Humiston bleeds to death. No identification. The fear of dying anonymously haunts troops on both sides. Some sew their names into their uniforms. Dog tags are still 40 years away. By the war's end, 400,000 soldiers will be missing in action.
We really cannot imagine the scale of death, the scale of suffering. No one could have imagined carnage on that scale.
Day 2 at Gettysburg brings more devastation and a daring all-out rebel assault. At stake, victory at Gettysburg and maybe the Civil War. Gettysburg, Day 2, 12 p.m. The rebels are on the move. They're planning a surprise attack by 14,500 troops. Their mission, break the Union stranglehold on the high ground by outflanking Meade's fishhook.
The goal of the Confederates on July 2nd is to find the Union left, damage, destroy it, and roll up it, and unhinge the entire Union position and win the Battle of Gettysburg.
Leading one rebel unit, Brigadier General William Barksdale. Pro-slavery, pro-secession, Southern patriot, hometown Columbus, Mississippi.
Barksdale was a man who took the ideas of the Confederacy and pursued them with raw aggressiveness, with an unfettered hatred for the Yankees.
But there's a problem. The land ahead of him was not scouted. Because Lee's cavalry is missing. They're 12 miles to the south raiding supplies.
The cavalry, the eyes and ears of an army, is no longer in communication with Lee. Lee is blind on the battlefield. And that means that he doesn't know what the Union is up to. And that, of course, is going to cripple any army.
Without cavalry to guide them, the rebel troops nearly march into plain sight of a Union position. Barksdale and the entire attack have to find another route. A costly delay adding 2 hours to their march. Time that lets Meade reinforce his defenses.
People often ask me, what if they had machine guns in the Civil War? I always say, forget all that. One set of walkie-talkies could have changed the outcome of the Civil War.
3 miles away, George Meade also has a problem. Just 3 days on the job, he's lost telegraph contact with Washington, D.C. Invented 25 years earlier, the telegraph is changing the way the Civil War battles are fought. President Abraham Lincoln, a hands-on commander-in-chief, likes rapid news from the field. The Signal Corps usually runs temporary lines to his generals at the front. But at Gettysburg, the field equipment hasn't arrived. And rebel forces have cut the lines.
During the whole thing, he's got to be thinking, Lee has beaten us time and time and time again. And if he does it here, there's no one standing between him and the Capitol. We're it. He can't lose.
To issue orders to the front, Meade uses a new innovation based on Morse code. Wigwag signaling. Waving the flags forms letters, like the dots and dashes of code. It works. Meade tracks the rebels' movements and responds with his own. Meanwhile, on Culp's Hill, Rufus Dawes waits with what's left of his Iron Brigade unit. Yesterday, they routed the rebels at the railroad cut. Today, they're with 11,500 men defending the Fishhook's right flank. Stretching over 3 miles, Meade's Fishhook is formidable. Heavy defenses along the high ground make the Union line almost impenetrable as long as troops stay in position. But one Union commander isn't following Meade's orders. Major General Dan Sickles. Wealthy, devious, a rogue. Recently acquitted of murdering his wife's lover using the first plea of temporary insanity in U.S. history, he'll leave Gettysburg even more notorious.
Dan Sickles was all about Dan Sickles. If it didn't benefit or aid Dan Sickles, he wasn't very interested in it.
He didn't go to West Point. He didn't have any military experience, but he was able to use his money, influence, and power to raise his own regiment.
Against Meade's orders, Sickles moves his 3rd Corps too far forward, fracturing the fishhook and leaving the flanks exposed. A blunder that could cost the Union the battle, and maybe the war. After hours of delay, the rebel force finally arrives in position. But Lee's lost the element of surprise. The Union knows what's coming. Hill, Dawes hears the assault begin.
At this hour, the storm of battle suddenly broke out. Artillery and musketry thundered and crashed together.
Wave after wave of rebel troops launch one of the epic assaults of the Civil War. Barksdale is about to get the fight he's always wanted, but is ordered to hold his ground.
William Barksdale is ready to go. He's chomping at the bit, but he has to wait a little longer. The plan is to take 10 Confederate brigades and attack with them 2 at a time.
One brigade striking the enemy, then 15 or 30 minutes later, the next one strikes the enemy, and then the next and the next.
Fights that are now burned into the pages of American history. Devil's Den, Little Round Top, the Wheat Field, the Peach Orchard, and Cemetery Ridge.
Barksdale can see that Sickles' mistake has left the Union vulnerable, creating the South's best chance for victory. But he is still under orders to hold his men back. "60 minutes pass, but Barksdale's regiment still waits. The rebel yell fills the air. Each unit has a unique sound. Fierce, savage, terrifying. With Barksdale, Private Joseph Lord, 21 years old, laborer, hometown, Big Oak, Mississippi. Carrying the colors makes him a prize target for Union sharpshooters. After the start of the initial attacks, Barksdale and his men are finally unleashed. They storm into enemy fire, racing towards Sickles' position. What happens next could change the course of the war. and sure of their cause, William Barksdale and his Mississippi Brigade are finally attacking. His 1,600 men are part of a massive offensive. 21,000 troops attacking Meade's line from Little Round Top to Cemetery Ridge. An all-out assault to win the Civil War now. Barksdale's mission: break through Union defenses on Cemetery Ridge. Opportunity lies right in his path. Against orders, Union General Dan Sickles moved his 3rd Corps out of position. They're now vulnerable, perfect targets for Barksdale and his men.
If Barksdale, as well as other Confederate brigades nearby, are able to exploit the gap in the Union line, it would be calamitous for the Union Army. The Army would be cut in two.
Barksdale's troops are unstoppable, overwhelming Sickles' men. Their defenses start to collapse. Meade's entire line could be next.
William Barksdale and his troops hit the Yankees like a hammer. He rolls over those Union troops, captures several hundred, if not more than that, of the Union troops, and continues on in several directions towards Cemetery Ridge.
Watching from Culp's Hill, Rufus Dawes knows the Army of the Potomac's in trouble.
We could plainly see that our troops were giving ground. Thousands were streaming to the rear. Our suspense and anxiety were intense. The rebel line was advancing. The rebel yell was predominant.
Lee's offensive is working. If it succeeds, he could win the knockout victory he seeks. Meade has no choice. He pulls 8,000 reinforcements from Culp's Hill to repel the rebels. Charging towards Cemetery Ridge, Barksdale and Lloyd advance 600 yards through a barrage of enemy fire. Union Commander Dan Sickles isn't so lucky. A direct cannonball hit severs his leg. One Yankee officer jokes it's bad news for Sickles, but good news for the Union. It takes Barksdale's Mississippi Brigade nearly an hour, but they finally break through Sickles' line. Union troops are on the run. Barksdale's men approach Cemetery Ridge, sensing victory. But they're charging straight into more than 20 Union cannons just 400 yards away, each capable of firing 2 rounds a minute. An exploding bag of gunpowder rockets a 12-pound cannonball of solid iron at 1,400 feet per second. At this range, Barksdale and Lloyd will be torn to pieces.
Barksdale, he's been grievously wounded during the attack. He's hit in the left thigh in a very dangerous wound, bleeding profusely. He's asked to leave the field, refuses. Continuing to lead the attack, he has part of his left foot shot away. Stays in the saddle, continuing to lead the attack. He knows the stakes here.
The Mississippi Brigade comes close to cutting through Union lines. Then Meade's reinforcements slam into Barksdale and Lloyd.
turn again to the front and see the enemy bursting through the bushes and firing at us. They had come out from the top of the hill, fresh. And did our gallant Barksdale ride into our midst and still say, "Forward through the bushes."
Barksdale's exhausted men finally break formation, losing their combined firepower. The rebel flag makes Lloyd a magnet for bullets.
A shock, as if I had a rail in my left hand and one end had struck the ground. The Union line marches over. One of them fixes a sling for my arm, leaving with a "Wish you well."
50% of Barksdale's brigade are dead, wounded, or captured. Lloyd almost overlooks their fallen commander.
I hear a weak hail to my right, and turning to it, find General Barksdale. What a disappointment when I hold my canteen to his mouth for a drink of water. Found a ball had gone through and let it all out. I took his last message to his brigade and left him, with the promise to send the litter bearers.
Barksdale's battle is over. His last thoughts are of his family.
I never have regretted the steps I have taken, and although dying, I do not regret my steps now. God, ever watch over and care for my dear wife and my boys. Tell them all that I died like a brave man.
You have to wonder if he was thinking, I'm going to end the war. I'm going to be the great instrument that is going to break that Union line in half and destroy the Army of the Potomac and remove it from my army's opposition for once and forever. And his troops' performance there was unbelievable and very nearly succeeded.
Meade's fishhook has held. This offensive is over. Confederate General Longstreet will call it the best 3 hours fighting ever done by any troops on any battlefield. 16,000 are dead, wounded, or missing on both sides. But day 2 isn't over. To stave off the rebels, Meade pulled troops from Culp's Hill. As night falls, only 1,400 Union defenders are left there. It's an opportunity the Confederates won't miss. This is their chance. On Culp's Hill, Robert E. Lee spies a new chance for victory. Meade pulled 8,000 troops from the hill to counter the rebel assault. Just 1,400 Union soldiers remain. Now 4,500 rebels are moving in for the kill. Charging up Culp's Hill with the rebels is Private Ridgely Howard. 33 years old, slaveholder, from a prominent Maryland family, hometown Baltimore. His grandfather fought with Washington in the Revolution. Now he's fighting to divide the nation they created. To Howard's disgust, Maryland sided with the North.
Maryland was badly divided. The eastern part of the state, slavery was entrenched, embedded. Ridgely Howard came from that plantation economy, from the slaveholding class.
Howard and the Maryland rebels attacked Union defenses dug into the hill. The first breastworks are 400 yards up. It's chaos. Bullets and shells fly in all directions.
You're looking at entrenched Federals. Earthworks made of logs and rocks and dirt. You've got to be thinking to yourself, this is my last fight. I'm not coming back from this. How do you function like that? This is what makes a true hero.
Up the sides of the hill we went, our line being continuously broken by the immense rocks which had to be flanked.
Howard faces fighting so fierce, one rebel calls it a slaughter pen.
It was not a pleasant position to be in. There were continual cries that we were firing into our own men.
Rebel troops claw their way up Lower Culp's Hill at a terrible cost. The prize is worth it. Beyond Culp's Hill lies the Baltimore Pike, the Union's main supply route and line of retreat.
If the Confederates capture Culp's Hill and control that point, the Union Army has to leave.
After 2 days of battle, wounded from both sides pour into makeshift field hospitals. At one, Private Joseph Lloyd is about to lose his arm. Barksdale's color guard, he's 23. During the Civil War, 2 soldiers will die of disease after medical care for every one killed in battle. The quickest solution to most serious limb injuries is amputation. Medicine is in its infancy, but anesthesia is available. Chloroform was recently discovered, and morphine administered liberally. 1,000 gallons of whiskey are also on hand. Confederate surgeon LeGrand Wilson has been treating casualties continuously since last night.
The patient may either sit on a chair or lie near the edge of a bed. The tourniquet is to be applied. While one assistant holds the hand, another is to take hold of the forearm.
The average amputation takes 12 minutes. No antibiotics, no knowledge of infection. They don't even stop to wash their hands or instruments. Surgeons work round the clock. It's the source of the term old sawbones. Lloyd will be one of the lucky ones. The odds of surviving an arm amputation, 77%. Rufus Dawes and his men are among the few Union defenders left on Culp's Hill. They move down to counterattack.
As we neared the breastworks, the crash of Union muskets breaks out on our right. The darkness and the suddenness of our arrival caused the enemy to fire wildly.
Dawes and his men win their skirmish. But like day one, they're the exception. Nearby, Ridgely Howard's unit captures a key section of breastworks. They keep advancing against heavy enemy fire.
The Federals opened on us from front, left, flank, and rear, and the firing was terrible, increasing with each step we took. Still, we pressed on.
Just 500 yards from the Baltimore Pike, and a position that would threaten the entire Union line. But at night, an unfamiliar ground, a great opportunity is lost.
They would be in the rear of the Union Army. They could be on the flank of the Union Army. But because of something so simple, darkness, they don't even know how close they are.
Unable to tell friend from foe, they cease firing.
If the Confederates had managed to carry Culp's Hill on the evening of July 2nd and break through, they would have captured the Union communications line on Baltimore Pike. All of the supply wagons were there, reserve artillery was there. That would have forced Meade to retreat, and it could have been a major turning point in favor of Confederate victory.
As the fight on Culp's Hill dies down, the Union wins a different kind of battle. Their newly formed intelligence agency, the Bureau of Military Information, is trying to discover Lee's battle plans. BMI agents are interrogating Confederate prisoners and realize they have captives from every rebel infantry division but one, George Pickett's. He has Lee's only fresh troops. Meade expects the rebels to attack tomorrow with everything they've got. It's a good bet George Pickett will lead the attack. Tomorrow, Ridgely Howard will face his Maryland neighbors in a fight to the death. And Robert E. Lee will launch one final all-out assault, Pickett's charge. Gettysburg, Day 3, 5 a.m. The stakes have never been higher. Yesterday, Robert E. Lee was on the verge of all-out victory. Confederate troops assaulted the Union's left flank and nearly broke through.
Robert E. Lee knows he came very close, but no cigar. General Meade's actually a little shaken. He knows it was a very close run thing, barely escapes disaster.
Now rebel troops are gaining ground on Lower Culp's Hill and are positioned to threaten the Union's rear lines. Meade sends in reinforcements. One Union brigade is led by Colonel James Wallace, educated, wealthy, also from Maryland. The only Union colonel who owns slaves.
Medic, get over here, quick!
During the Revolution, his grandfather and Ridgely Howards fought in the same regiment. Today, the two Marylanders will battle each other.
Maryland, like other border states, is torn apart. So many divided loyalties. Maryland, they had to decide which side they were on.
Maryland is one of 5 border states, loyal to the Union, but slavery is legal. Passions for and against slavery run hot here. Federal troops occupied Baltimore throughout the war to prevent a Confederate uprising. On Culp's Hill, Ridgely Howard's unit prepares to attack. Their target, defenses held by Union troops from their home state.
The men seemed to feel the solemnity of the occasion and to understand the desperate nature of the charge to be made. I prayed for strength to do my duty.
Last night, the rebels outnumbered Union defenders 3-1. Now, those odds are reversed.
It appeared to me as if the whole of my company was being swept away by the awful shower of shot and shell flying around us. A demon seemed to take possession of me. I had but one thought: to avenge my comrades.
Howard takes a bullet fired by the Union's 1st Maryland Regiment.
I felt a burning in my thigh, as if all the blood in my body was rushing to one spot. It is a hard thing to say, but I am convinced the Federals deliberately shot at us while we lay there helpless on the field. A soldier at my left was shot. I was also struck in the hip.
Hip wounds are almost always fatal.
Every moment I expected would be my last, so I straightened myself out, folded my arms over my breast, and waited for my time to come.
Time slows as Ridgely Howard prepares to die. James Wallace won't let a fellow Marylander suffer, no matter which side he's on.
The 1st Maryland Confederate met us and were cut to pieces. We sorrowfully gathered up many of our old friends and acquaintances and had them carefully and tenderly cared for.
I don't know how long I lay. Seconds would seem to be minutes, and minutes hours.
Coming to Howard's aid, the soldiers he'd least expect to help. The same Union troops who shot him.
They asked what regiment I belonged to. I replied, the Maryland Battalion, to which they made answer, "Do you know you are fighting your own men?" I answered, "Yes, and we intend to fight them."
With the rebel assault on Culp's Hill stalled, Robert E. Lee readies one more massive attack. It will be one of the iconic battles of the Civil War. 12,000 Confederate troops, hundreds of cannons. The largest artillery barrage ever in North America is about to begin. After 2 days of attack and counterattack, Robert E. Lee is about to launch the offensive that will decide the Battle of Gettysburg and the course of the war. He's sending in 12,000 soldiers anchored by George Pickett's division, his only fresh troops. Their mission, attack the Union center and cut the Army of the Potomac in two.
Lee's pushing all of the chips to the middle of the table because he knows it's his last chance he's going to have.
This was a calculated decision. It was well thought out and had a reasonable chance of success.
Leading one of the rebel brigades, General Joe Davis, aristocrat, slave owner. His uncle, Confederate President Jefferson Davis. His hometown of Vicksburg, Mississippi, is under Union siege. To weaken Union defenses, 160 Confederate cannons move into position. A line of artillery 2 miles long. Against them, 100 Union cannons. It's 87 degrees, brutally humid. Artillery barrage ever in the Western Hemisphere.
Would shake the internals. The organs would actually, in some cases, rip apart. The membranes within the ear would tear. This would create blood streaming down the sides of these artillery units' faces.
Can be heard in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, 40 miles away. Cease fire! Cease fire! To lure Lee into thinking he's crippled the Union's artillery, Union commanders silence their guns. By 3 p.m., Confederate artillery also stops firing.
An eerie quiet reigned over the battlefield. All the smoke from that bombardment still sat on the windless day. The Yankees expected a huge attack from the Southerners. The Southerners knew what they were about to do and what they went up against, and it must have been an intense moment as they stared at each other across the fields.
The Confederate command believes it's safe to send in their troops. Time to set in motion one of the iconic battles of the Civil War. Joe Davis and his men move out. Part of a rebel assault that stretches a mile. To reach Union lines, they must cross 1,700 yards of open meadow, then race up a hill. Unknown to the Confederate leaders, the Union artillery still has plenty of firepower. They're just waiting for the rebels to come into range. Joe Davis and his men are marching into a barrage of artillery hell. First, the ordnance rifle cannon, made with 4.5-inch strips of wrought iron. Invented just 2 years earlier, they're tough and reliable, designed with a 3-inch groove bore for greater range and deadly accuracy. The ordnance delivers shells that explode on impact. And time shells and shrapnel that burst in the air over the enemy's heads. One shot can take out 10 men.
Being on the receiving end of one of these projectiles from the rifled ordnance would be completely devastating. You don't know what's coming at you. You can only imagine. And then all of a sudden, the guys that you are standing next to are gone, vaporized.
Stopping to return fire in an open field is suicide. And there's no point. Their muskets don't have the range. Davis knows his men have to keep moving.
We were growing thinner at every step. Under this destructive fire, which commanded our front and left with fatal effect. The troops displayed great coolness. We're well in hand and moved steadily forward, regularly closing up the gaps made in their ranks.
About halfway to Cemetery Ridge, the rebels come into range of the older-style, smooth-barreled Napoleon cannon. The most popular artillery in the Civil War. It fires 4 kinds of ammunition, including solid 12-pound cannonballs. Balanced in front of advancing troops, they can mow down a whole row of men like bowling balls.
It's hard to conceive how men can keep going in the face of such opposition. The level of courage is intense and large.
Until Davis and his men can return fire, they're just target practice for Union artillery. The attack that will come to be known as Pickett's Charge is being blown to hell. Lee's offensive is advancing toward enemy troops on Cemetery Ridge. Union artillery is mowing them down. It's the moment of truth at Gettysburg for both armies. Joe Davis and his men are now 400 yards from the Union guns. Canister range. Canister is the most devastating weapon of the day. Basically tin cans packed with 28 iron balls. The casing explodes, spraying the iron balls into advancing troops at hundreds of yards per second.
Canister shot just made that cannon a gigantic shotgun, and it would mow down up to 20 guys at a time, if not more. Guys would be completely tore apart. Limbs, heads, arms, legs, and it was so demoralizing for the other soldiers to witness such an event.
Davis regroups at a dirt road, the Emmitsburg Road, 200 yards from the Union line. They're now within range of enemy muskets. One fence they're using for cover takes 836 rifle shots. The brigade to the left of Davis hasn't caught up, exposing his flank and opening a hole in the rebel line. A few men under Davis make it to the Union line and plant their flag on a stone wall. A brave but futile gesture. The rest of the unit under Davis cracks and retreats. Rebel troops under George Pickett managed to break through and surge over the wall. Union gunners fire point blank.
Now it's to the point of hand-to-hand combat. This is as brutal as it gets. It is literally with musket butts and using fighting knives, using the bayonets by themselves as thrusting weapons.
The rebels overrun 3 cannons, but they're soon overwhelmed. It's Lee's last chance for victory at Gettysburg, but it's not enough.
They almost cut the Union Army in two. They almost did it. Robert E. Lee's great moment of promise quickly turned into his greatest defeat by far.
The entire rebel line retreats.
They are compelled, forced to retire across that very ground in which they had made this brave, gallant charge.
More than half of the force that began Pickett's charge is dead, wounded, captured, or missing. Lee loses a third of his army at Gettysburg. It's the bloodiest battle ever fought on American soil. More than 50,000 casualties. Robert E. Lee's bold invasion of the North has failed. Independence Day. Rufus Dawes of the Iron Brigade turns 25 today.
What a solemn birthday. My little band, now only 200 men, have all been out burying the bloody corpses of friend and foe. No fighting today.
The Civil War will last another 2 years. Gettysburg wasn't Lee's last chance to win, but it was his best. He'll never come this close again.
It gave Northern people the belief that Union military high command could in fact match Robert E. Lee on the battlefield. Nobody believed that the war was near an end, but many in the North, they took from Gettysburg solace, hope that in fact, the tide could possibly turn in their favor.
For so many reasons, this battle stands out as a pivotal and significant American event.
Rufus Dawes leaves the Army in 1864 with symptoms resembling post-traumatic stress disorder. His son, Charles, will become the 30th Vice President of the United States of America under Calvin Coolidge. Joe Davis wakes up to learn that Vicksburg, his hometown, has fallen to Ulysses S. Grant. He falls gravely ill, but keeps his command. He'll accompany Lee to Appomattox for the South's formal surrender. Union troops destroy LeGrand Wilson's farm. From the sale of his last bale of cotton, he starts his own medical practice. Ridgely Howard recovers from his wounds and returns to the war, losing a leg at Cold Harbor in 1864. Legend has it, his ghost still haunts his Baltimore home. It falls to Fannie Bueller and the people of Gettysburg to help the Army care for the casualties and pick up the pieces.
The town of Gettysburg was overwhelmed for months by the wounded. The smell of death lingered there for weeks, for months. So the horrors of the aftermath of that battle were unmatched in the war.
A young girl finds a fallen soldier in a yard. He has no identification, but grasps a photograph of 3 children fixed in glass. The picture becomes famous, widely printed in newspapers. The mystery of the unknown soldier captures the country's imagination. 4 months later, a woman in upstate New York recognizes the children and solves the mystery. The soldier is Amos Humiston. She is his widow. Humiston is buried at a new cemetery on the Gettysburg battlefield. President Abraham Lincoln speaks for barely 2 minutes at its dedication. The battle here and his speech will echo through the ages. We here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Gettysburg was a turning point in the war to decide America's future, preserving a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.